Hi everyone and welcome to Science Lab. Science are happening because Jesus is coming. Every day we are looking at some of the great science that are happening around us. In this episode, we are going to look at some of the technological advancements in these last days. The second half of humanity is joining the internet. People in countries like India will change the internet and it will change them.
LO, two simple letters that marked one of the biggest changes in human history. In 1969, programmers were trying to type login. One programmer typed the L, he typed the O, he typed the G, the system crashed. So, the very first message on the internet ever was LO.
50 years later, half the world is now online, but the half is primarily from the rich world, which means the other half is quite obviously will have to come from the poor world. How will the second half of humanity coming online change the internet, and how will the internet change them?
The really interesting place to look at is India. India's internet penetration was pretty low until very recently with the launch of a new mobile network called Reliance Jio, with incredibly cheap phones and incredibly cheap data prices. Reliance Jio launched aggressively in 2016, offering subsidized handsets and free data to hook people in. India went from being a relatively expensive place to consume data to being the cheapest in the world. Prices crashed by 94%.
New users in the developing world are browsing the internet in much the same way as people in the developed world. When people get online, the first thing they do is they chat with their friends, they watch sports, they watch movies, they watch music videos. But this is where the similarities end. The internet was built on the assumptions that many users speak English, are literate, and are media savvy. None of those things remain true for the second half of the internet. You have a whole bunch of languages that don't enjoy very good support in terms of web browsers or input. And you have a whole bunch of people who can't actually read or write. There's practically no usage of desktop computers, laptop computers. It's almost entirely on mobile phones, and these mobile phones tend not to be the expensive, very powerful ones. They have limited amounts of storage. This is prompting big tech companies to change the way their products work. They have to understand these new behaviors. They have to fundamentally rethink how they supply their services. For much of the world that is now coming online, text is not the natural way to interact. It's smaller apps that can do more and that can be used with voice or video rather than text. Many tech giants have already begun to establish themselves in the emerging markets. Facebook has over 1.5 billion users in developing countries. Creating large user bases is one thing, making money from them is another. The prevailing assumption around making money on the internet until this point has been a largely American assumption of advertising. 99% of Facebook's revenue comes from advertising, as does 85% of Google. But many people in the developing world are poor. So users don't have the same value to advertisers. Take Facebook's last quarter of 2018. They make 12 times as much money per user in North America than they do in Asia. And overall annual revenue from the developing world is much lower too. Google, for instance, about 46% of their revenues comes from the US alone, and only about 15% from Asia. That 15% includes rich countries like Australia and Japan. Take those away and the revenue from Asia would be even lower. If the traditional advertising model isn't going to work, tech companies will have to think outside of the box. What people will pay for is the opportunity to express themselves. Until the advent of smartphones really, a big money spinner for Indian mobile networks was something called a caller ringback tone. I would pick a song that I like very much, and if you were calling me, you would hear it, and I pay a monthly fee for that to happen. Now think about exactly what this is. I am paying money for a song I will never listen to, only so that my friends who are calling me can hear it because I want to express myself. So it will be lots of novel ideas like that for very, very small amounts of money. But we are talking about lots and lots of people doing these things. One thing is for sure, the internet's second revolution will change people's lives for the better. The ability of people around the world to have a good time is becoming a little bit more equal. And that, while hard to pin down in economic data, is a net benefit to just the general well-being of humankind, which can be very easy to understate or to ignore, especially if you are used to those things but has a really meaningful impact.
The potential for quantum computing to crack other countries' encrypted networks has captured the attention of national government. Which of the world's fundamental challenges could be solved by quantum computing?
Quantum computing is not just better computing, faster computing, it's a different kind of computing. It's predicted to solve some of the world's most fundamental problems, from inventing new drugs to making brand new materials and creating more precise climate models. It could solve some of the problems in seconds that would take current supercomputers thousands of years. The technology is in its early stages, but the effort is quickly gaining momentum. So, how will quantum computing change the world?
A standard computer might have billions of bits. Each one can be a 1 or a 0, and they are all completely separate from each other. Quantum bits or qubits work differently for a couple of reasons that come from quantum mechanics. The theory shows that certain kinds of problems, not all, just some particular thorny ones, are made much easier when you've got quantum computers. One of those problems is in encryption, the kinds of codes that perfect your credit card details online, or your messages in WhatsApp or Signal. What got people really interested in making quantum computers was the realization that they could break encryption that was supposed to be too hard to crack because regular computers couldn't crack them. That's the kind of thing that gets the attention of national governments, the ability to crack other countries' encrypted networks. As in the case of artificial intelligence, China says it intends to lead the world in quantum science and has announced plans to open its own national quantum laboratory to open in 2020. America is getting involved too. It intends to create a national quantum initiative. That's because the price that quantum computing offers, the potential strategic or commercial advantage is huge. Imagine if you could make minute-to-minute real-time stock predictions based on data from every trade ever made, or if you could simply compute the formula for a new fuel or a drug that beats a horrible disease. That's the kind of promise that quantum computing may offer. There are already quantum computers out there, but it's a bit like the situation with regular computers in the 1950s. Big basement-sized things that required a pile of PhDs to operate, and they still weren't very powerful. There's a huge effort to make more powerful quantum computers. This used to be the stuff of university physics departments, but you can see the potential when you see who's in the business now. It's big names like Google, Microsoft, IBM. But it's not just about when one day one company or one lab invents this one computer. It's going to be a bunch of small advances towards the kind that's commercially available, reliable, and can really solve some of these big problems. Here's the thing: when we talk about quantum computing, people tend to think all singing, all powerful machines that can run any kind of program, what's called a universal computer. That's still a distant prospect, but in the meantime there will be smaller machines, more specific purpose, less general purpose. These things are incredibly hard to run. They are held at temperatures lower than that of deep space in very, very controlled laboratory environments. Even if you could just pick one off the shelf, you wouldn't. Yes, they are incredibly powerful for some kinds of problems, but they are not going to replace the kind of computer on your desk or in your phone. You don't need quantum powers to edit photos or send emails. In fact, what will probably happen is that a few companies have the best computers and you can use them on a kind of time-shared basis in the cloud, or you send off your quantum problem and just get an answer back. But the kinds of problems that we will be able to pose and the kinds of answers we will be able to get are absolutely unthinkable now. That's what as governments, industry giants and plucky startups in on the race.
And now it's time for the trivial question of the day. This time, instead of a question, let me ask you as a riddle. Every nation has this, but they call it with a different name. Every country has this, but the value is not the same. What is this?
And the options are option A, water, option B, petrol, option C, currency.
We'll find out the answer after a short break. Welcome back to Science Lab. Science are happening because Jesus is coming. Before the break, I asked you a riddle. Have you found the answer? Every nation has this, but they call it with a different name. Every country has this, but the value is not the same. What is this?
Option A, water, option B, petrol, option C, currency.
And the right answer is option C, currency. But many countries are going cashless at great speed. What are the advantages of ditching hard cash and what are the dangers? Somewhere in the near future, physical money will become like the relics of a different age and they will only be found in museums. In other words, hard cash will disappear. It will become electronic, transferred by mobile phones and later in very advanced technology. So, what's the rush to get rid of cash and what's the cost?
Let's face it, money is cumbersome for consumers and banks. You need to mint the cash, you need to print the bills, you need to transport them in armed trucks, store it in very secure vaults, and you need to sort it at the till as well. Operating in cash costs country about 0.5% of their GDP every year. But cost isn't the only incentive to move towards a cashless future. Demand is rising. Primarily, demand from the young generations who are looking for fast, easy-to-use means of payments.
Digital payments aren't just easy, they are neat. It becomes easier for governments to monitor tax evasion and fraud. So we will have less of that going on probably. Having every single payment automatically recorded is efficient. But there's a downside. Let's assume, for example, that a country that used to be democratic, where people are not paying too much attention about safeguarding their privacy, becomes undemocratic and someone wants to control citizens more closely. They will try to infer from what you buy your political leanings potentially, and generally speaking just monitor what you're doing in ways that they shouldn't be doing. Living in a democratic country doesn't mean you shouldn't be concerned. There are also worries that private companies perhaps might use this data in ways that are not safe or that you might not like. And for a number of sectors, knowing what you do with your money is very important. Electronic money trades can allow governments and private companies to access and harvest personal data. But there is another threat that is worrying banks: cyber attacks. In March 2019, Capital One Bank was hacked. A solo hacker managed to steal away 106 million people's personal details in a matter of days. And that attack was noticed just a few months after. You can see that a lot of companies are not very well protected yet against such threats. Pretty much every day we hear of data breaches, cyber attacks that are successful. It's much harder to prevent an attack than to be on the hacker side, because you only need to succeed once as a hacker. Once upon a time, you would have two guys coming in, they would tell everyone to be on the floor, put the money in the bag and then run away with the money, and you would get insurance against that. You knew what the risk was. Nowadays, with cyber attacks, they can happen anytime, they can take any form. So it's very hard to insure against. Still, many countries are fast moving towards a cashless society. In Sweden, the number of retail cash transactions per person has fallen by 80% in the past 10 years. The trend is even evident in far more cash-loyal societies. China's digital payments rose from 4% of all payments in 2012 to 34% in 2017. The trend is inevitable, but a gradual transition is key. It's important that we have a sort of control as to how fast this happens. Because if that's not the case, some people might be left behind. Some people may find it harder to grasp how much money they have without the physical representation of it. Not everyone knows how to use internet banking technology, and people living in remote areas where internet cover is patchy may find they have to drive for miles for their basic needs. And there is another sector of society that relies heavily on cash. People living on the street don't carry card terminals with them, so it would be very hard for them. Well, first of all, to collect money and to pay for things. They will be among the people who suffer the most from it. Going cashless is just the latest evolution of money in the modern economy. But it raises a fundamental question: what is the value of money if it doesn't physically exist? Central banks enact monetary policy by exerting control over the amount of money that is created and that is in circulation. And they can do it because they are the only entities that print and create money. The purpose of it is to control the amount of money that is used by the entire economy. In a cashless society, obviously this becomes much harder because money presumably can be created by other entities. And so, central banks are actually starting to realize this, especially after Facebook made the announcement that they were looking to launch a digital currency. It shows you the extent to which central banks are already thinking about the future of money. The move towards cashless societies is well underway, but governments need to ensure that as cash is phased out, the vulnerable in society aren't left behind. They need to navigate carefully the many pitfalls that a digital economy will bring.
Never before in the history of mankind has the technology improved in this manner. Life has transformed into more than living. We are about to become one with the technology.
In the last days, Antichrist will come to this world and introduce a universal mark of the beast. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of the man. His number is 666.
What is foretold in the Bible is happening again in our lifetime. This technological advancement shows that we are living in the last days. The Lord Jesus Christ is coming again very soon. Thank you for watching this episode. Don't forget to tune into Science Lab next time.
Send us photos, videos, news and YouTube links which are worth sharing. And also send us your feedbacks to our email address sciencelab@angeltv.org. Suppose if you have missed any of the episodes, don't worry. You can watch it again and again in our Science Lab YouTube page. But don't forget to like, share and comment on the video.
Ask your friends and relatives to watch the Science Lab so that they will know that they are living in the last days. Remember, signs are happening because Jesus is coming. Maranatha.